Two Star Trek RIPs, Robert and Stephen. Yep, this week on Trekland Tuesdays Live, number 332. Coming at you right here with Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek, out of Portal 47, out of the heart of Trekland, including Trekland Treks, for some sanity, clarity, and the big picture in all things Star Trek. And first off, I do want to say thank you also to our Patreons. And also, just a reminder that if you are planning your trip to LA, Trekland Treks will bring Star Trek alive. It'll be your own customized away mission. You set it up with my help, and then I'm your concierge driver, prop wrangler, costume holder, whatever you need to make it a memorable day when you're here in LA sometime over the winter. You know, we have great winter weather. It's raining today finally, but most of the time, the odds are good that you will make your winter trip, escape your climb, and come to LA, have a great time. And one of the days, or maybe two, we will set you up with a wonderful customized away mission just for you. So think about that as we head into the holidays and as we look ahead at all these weeks of no new fresh Trek. And as we wonder who will be next, right? Will it be Discovery first, or will it be Prodigy over on Netflix giving us our first new Trek? But it's going to be after the year. It's now through the holidays. And as we figure out what to do with our Trek and how to merge that with the holidays, this last week has presented us with a couple of moments to pause and reflect on a couple of those that made Star Trek what it was. And they were totally different birds to me. And if you're on my Instagram, and I hope you are, I had to get on, of all things, Sunday while I was on the road and say a few words about, yes, Robert Butler, or Bob Butler, as I was privileged to call him the last few years. One of those names that you read about in your Star Trek history, that if you came up with the making of Star Trek or wherever you came in, he has a claim to fame as no other. He was the first Star Trek director because he directed The Cage, the first pilot. And a lot of people used to be dismissive of The Cage. I mean, you get it. Oh, it's where no man has to come from somewhere, right? But people were dismissive of The Cage because, well, it wasn't Kirk. You know what? History has been kind to Pike and Number One, and even Veen and the Telosians. They are vibrant parts of the whole Star Trek ethos. And so, even though it's recast, even though it's 40, 50 years difference in TV technology, some of those basic instincts that, yes, Robert Butler brought to directing The Cage are still with us today. And that is why, speaking of Portal 47's open house, Bob Butler was my very first open house guest back in 2016, back as we were all goo-goo over the 50th anniversary, and I thought he would be a perfect guest. Now, at the time, he passed away about a week ago, at the age of 95. So what was that, 7 years ago? He was 88, and he was wonderful on camera. We talked, he told stories, but the thing about Robert Butler, and this is what comes through what I'm trying to get across. It's not just the recite the facts and talk about the people. His whole attitude was reflective of what he enjoyed doing in his TV directing career, which was filming pilots. It's like he got to film little 1 hour and sometimes 2 hour movies on a TV schedule, TV budget, TV pressure, and then move on. He didn't just, if you were the one who directed the pilot of all Star Trek in the beginning, that would be something to notch your resume. But Robert Butler also, talk about setting a tone and a mood. Robert Butler directed the pilot for Batman, Batman 66, yes. He directed Hill Street Blues, right? The first ensemble show that, I mean, you had to juggle that. But Stephen Bochco, he directed the pilot for Hogan's Heroes, which was a sitcom, but still Nazi prison camp as a sitcom. Yeah. What else? He directed the pilot from Moonlighting, right? Launched some careers there, as well as that whole genre of tongue-in-cheek detective, will they, won't they, couples sexual chemistry detective romp, and set off that genre. But Robert Butler was around for some amazing television to kick it off, and then never went back to touch it again. Not Star Trek, not Batman, not Moonlighting. Oh, he co-created Remington Steele, speaking of detective pairs. So the guy had a full career. Some things you've never heard of, but a lot of he more than made his mark. But his whole attitude was he didn't care to go back and reinvent it. He'd been there, done that, and he moved on. He was invited to direct Where the Man's Gone Before. That's some hard-won experience the whole crew got. And he said, no, thank you. I'm off to do something else. It's amazing that way. And as the years passed and Star Trek blew up, he didn't care to pursue it. He didn't care to, he was busy with his career. He had done one, the very early one. And as a lot of Hollywood folks think, they think, oh, that's a million years ago. They don't get what if something is going to attract a legacy, it happens. Then once it does, some Hollywood folks never realize that until someone has to show them, or they get burned and they walk away, or they think it's so old no one cares anymore. A lot of people from the original series era and the movie era have this, until you go and show them, they have no clue about it. Ralph Senensky, the director, was burned from being fired wrongly, wasn't his fault, on the Tholian web, but had no clue of all of us out here in the woodwork and what we thought. And that was a little bit about Robert Butler. So about the time of the 50th, I had reached out to him. He also sat down to do some recording for the Roddenberry Vault about the same time. And I think between the two of those, we got him warmed up a little bit. And I was so thrilled that he did some other documentaries, maybe a podcast or two, I don't know. Certainly some legit documentaries. And then by 2019, the year before the pandemic, the last normal Comic-Con we had in San Diego, his son, Rob, cooperated to bring him down to San Diego. We got him in on a Sunday early, came up. I love the pictures we did. And we basically had a live 45, 50-minute session with Robert Butler. And I know that room held 420 folks. It was a standing room only. People were turned away at the door, even though it was early Sunday afternoon of Comic-Con. I am so thrilled that so many people just were on cloud nine from seeing a direct link to the cage, to the beginning of all Star Trek. It all stemmed from there on the screen. And to hear Robert Butler take credit, not take credit, talk about his differences with Gene and anybody else on the crew. Not ridiculous. The guy was too much of a gentleman to be that, but the creative differences, and to shrug his shoulders and say, okay, I was wrong on that one. He didn't care. He wasn't in love with it. He did it. He wanted to make the best show he could and launch the series. And he didn't care that it didn't sell. He didn't care about a second chance. He didn't care about coming back while the series was on. He had done it and he moved on. And he talked about that whole attitude too. So I'm just saying, it's been a gift. It's been an absolute gift that for all these years in between, when he wasn't in the mood or when we weren't fit, when we weren't there, surely he did some interviews over the years, but here in the era of everybody's got a YouTube show on their laptop, everybody's got a podcast. The fact that we got him down to talk about some of these facts and with a modern sensibility, because we got to talk about that too. The casting, it just turned out that basically he didn't care about the brewing money problems. He didn't care that Major was really Gene's mistress. He didn't care about a lot of things. He was just there to do the product, to do the piece the best he could. And he took great pride in that. And he took great pride in all the shows that he did, the pilots that he launched, the franchises and series that he launched, among a lot of other ones that weren't nearly as infamous. He won an Emmy for a show not really, Robert Holden did television, The Blue Knight, a cop show. Did that pilot and won an Emmy for it. That was Robert Butler. And I was just so glad that I got to interact with him some and have direct conversations. I'm so glad that we were able to get him on Portal and then get him live. I'm so glad that he got out to some other situations where he was recorded for the long haul, the duration. And to this day, if you go over and sign up for my mail list, my poor underappreciated mailing list that I don't do enough. But when you do sign up, you get some free gifts. And the audio of Robert Butler is one of the free gifts you get when you sign up to this day. It's just amazing talking to him. What was surprising after that was the other end of the spectrum. It turns out that writer Stephen Kandel passed away in October. The news did not get out until just a few days ago. Stephen Kandel, of course, if nothing else, again, longtime career writer, but for our purposes, the guy who invented Harry Mudd. And you could say, yeah, along with actor Roger C. Carmel. But Stephen Kandel wrote Mudd's Women. Now, it was off a premise in Gene's original pitch packet. And it was one of the 3 scripts written for the second pilot when NBC gave Gene a second chance, Gene and Desilu. And it was just called The Women. And it wasn't about pimping prostitutes. It was about wiving settlers, which was amazing because not more than 3-4 years later, ABC would have a dramedy called Here Come the Brides about the brides that were sent around the horn from Massachusetts of their own volition for all the lumberjacks in New Seattle, territorial Seattle in the late 1800s. All men, no women. They wanted to settle and civilize the place and settle down and have wives and husbands and families and start settling the place. Make it more than just a work camp. That's what Harry Mudd was, the Mudd's Women was based on. And then the marriage of Roger C. Carmel and the character led it to being really the first recurring guest star since Mark Leonard didn't get to play the Romulan commander again and didn't get a chance to play Sarek again, but it feels like it because he played 2 great parts. These actors that played 2 different roles like Dan and Muldur. But no, one of the few times that we had any recurring actors out of the original 79 hours, and it was Roger Carmel and Harry Mudd. That's Stephen Kandel. Now, it was a happy accident, the rewrite process. The Mudd of Mudd's Women is a lot different than the Mudds of I Mudd. There's a lot of more sinister going on with Mudd's Women that isn't quite there. I Mudd is a little bit more of a farce, sure. And then, of course, yes, he did sell 2 more for he actually pitched 2 Mudd stories. We got Mudd's Passion on the animated series. One called Mud, A Deep Mud, was about one that was literally on a muddy planet. Anyway. And then, oddly enough, he sold a script for the animated series near the end called The Jihad, which at a time when no one knew what that was in 1973, most Americans had not heard that term. But he sold that one. It was a quest. It was a good old quest story with a religious war component to it, was the threat. So, yes, here's the thing. I came to Star Trek professionally with Next Generation, and anything I got to do with the original series era was backtracking. I get a chance to do that. But we were so full of Next Gen and DS9 and Enterprise and Voyager for so long until everything dried, everything shut down and went dry in 2005. But the first 10, 15 years I was active here, I would have loved to have been able to do more. I never got a chance to meet Stephen Kandel. I've just realized later his career slowed. He'd been active for 20, 30 years, but when things slowed down for him in the 80s, early 90s, he moved east and lived around the New York area and the East Coast. So he wasn't hanging around out here, not going to cons, not making himself available easily. He wasn't easily fun. And to be honest, the last 5, 10 years, I wasn't even thinking about him being with us still. So bad on me. I would have loved to have called, tracked him down, Zoomed. And I think there were some in recent years. He wrote a parody satirical piece during the Trump years about President Trump. So he was still with us and blowing and going a little bit. But no, he passed away 2 or 3 weeks ago in late October, and word just came out, which reminds me a lot of what happened with Harve Bennett. He was in a small town in the Northeast, and the world was not set up to automatically ping a bell in LA whenever some former person with Hollywood TV credits and film credits passes away. That happened with Harve Bennett. It took a week for the word to get out. People didn't just jump up and immediately call the trades. And that's apparently what happened with Stephen Kandel. And whereas Robert Butler's passing was pretty much instantaneous, was announced, was out there with friends, Stephen Kandel, not so much. And of course, they have one's a writer, one's a director. One is involved with all these series and franchises in this niche that he did. I'm the pilot director. That was almost his calling card. And for the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, If that's what you were about, then you might want to call Rob Butler to launch your show, especially if you were going for a new tone, a new edge, and he was good about wiping the slate clean and coming up with something that everybody else could run with as he moved on. Different story there than the Stephen Kandel writer story. But for us here in Trekland, looking at the scope, it's interesting how sometimes we have people passing. They always say people die in threes. I don't know who our third would be for Trek World. It didn't surprise me to find out, A, oh, he was back east, and then B, this is why he hadn't been in our faces. Aside from the fact that he was 96, both these gentlemen had wonderfully long lives. And again, I didn't get to talk to Stephen Kandel, but I consider it such a blessing that here at just the last 5, 6, 7 years, Bob Butler was still sharing with fans, even to a point where he had never thought about it before this time of his life. It's almost like he was thinking, okay, fine. You Trekkies aren't going to go away. What do you want to know? It's been interesting. And again, in my case, thanks to his son, Rob, for making that possible. So I just want to make sure everybody heard the news, most of all, and was familiar with, what people had done. Apparently it's a rare thing to find photos of Stephen Kandel. People are scrambling to get it, but I see Memory Alpha's got one up here from the pool in the 70s, 80s, whatever that is. So just have a moment this week to think of 2 more Star Trek RIPs that we've lost this week. Robert Butler and Stephen Kandel. And if you hear anybody revising the folk wisdom here about Harry Mudd, please don't let yourself be caught up thinking that Harry Mudd was a pimp. Harry Mudd was doing the settler's wife thing at a time when Star Trek was talking about the final frontier, literally. And of course, we know that in Roger Carmel's hands, and then in Rainn Wilson's hands later, Harry Mudd lives just fine. All right. That's going to be my comment today. I was looking for a little bit shorter, sweeter time. I do, of course, want to mention a thank you to our TTLers. Can I do that? Yes, indeed. So thank you, Diana Hopkins, Robin Wilson, Lawrence Todd, Anne-Marie Siegel, Justin Porteous, Galinda Bruton, Chris Jiggins, Pranakasha Productions, Comedy Forecast, and Andrew Jasimski. And our live wires, Robert McLean, Byron Bailey, J.R. Poole, Halbjörn Gunjansson, Alan Hoensi, Dave Gregory, Tobias Rex, Danya S. Runyon, and Casey Shafsky. Thank you guys so much for guys, gals, and peeps for that. Of course, everybody can jump in on my simple little Patreon. It's just $5 and $10 a month. Patreon.com/Trekland Live for a shout out and for access to our early years of Portal 47 guest stars. But the other thing that I love doing is getting fans on their tours for Trekland Trek, setting this up with people, seeing what their favorites are, seeing what people love to do when they're on vacation, and helping them do their cosplay if they want to do that, helping them pick their 4 sites for the day, making sure that it's an experience they're not bogged down messing with traffic or what's a crowd, what's been blown up, what's the common wisdom about going certain places. Helping people with all that kind of wisdom for their Trek too. That's a thing. Also this week, we are back. Season 11 of the Trek Files. Our 2nd episode is up with Luann Fortier. Who is that, you ask? Well, in the 70s paper and stamp fandom, William Shatner's Letter Exchange was basically one of his fan clubs for a while. Anyway, Luann has so many wonderful mementos and documents from the years when she was one of the major sources of Shatner news, which means that she was a major source of Star Trek news. And folks like Susan Sackett and folks like Shatner's family company knew to go to her and to their letter exchange. And if you say letter exchange, it's yes, not pen pals, but pen friend. Anyway, you have to listen to it. You have to listen to this week's The Trek Files, right? Wherever you get fine podcasts, it's The Trek Files on Facebook is where the documents are, though. All right. That's going to do it for me, but hold on. If you're watching us later on YouTube, I wish you could join us live on a Tuesday afternoon sometime. Be great if you could at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, and yes, 9 p.m. UK time and 10 Central Europe. If you are leaving us right at the moment too, you know you can also find me at Larry Nemecek on Twitter /X. It's Larry Nemecek's Trekland, where you are right now. Have you liked and subscribed and shared and rang the bell and all the things on YouTube? It's also on Instagram as well. And yeah, Facebook. Okay. Portal47.net. If you want to check that out, your inside guide to more in-depth Trek is there also. That's where we are. If you are leaving us right now, hey, please. Might be a weird winter coming up. So stay healthy, do all the things, all right? Stay woke, check your sources, and trek well, everybody.